Washington could be without two defensive starters this weekend against Ohio State.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And just quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there today. We want to talk about Demond Williams Jr. winning Offensive Player of the Week in the Big Ten. That's 3 for 3 for Washington, by the way. 3 games played, 3 Offensive Players of the Week. We'll get there in a little bit because we need to talk about Washington's front seven against this Ohio State rushing attack. But the big news of the week before we can even get there is Buddah Al-Uqdah, Washington's starting linebacker who transferred over from Washington State, is out this week, and at least the next couple of weeks, we're going to monitor that situation. But even bigger than that, because Jeremiah Smith is coming to town, Tacario Davis is officially questionable for this game.
Questionable, man. You know what? There's no chance Tacario misses this matchup. I think not playing against Washington State, you kind of could see that one coming, just because even though Leroy Bryant didn't have his greatest game, Dylan Robinson showed some things. You could get by against Washington State with Ephesians Priceock and company, shall we say?
Sure.
But like you said, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Ryan Day, you're playing Ohio State at Husky Stadium. Like, there's no way Tacario misses this game short of a setback that hasn't even occurred yet, and which I'm not speculating on. I'm just saying, like, it would have to be something else that comes up this week that would preclude him from playing. But again, you got to love the games from Jedd Fisch, because that's pretty much kind of what I chalk this up to being.
So when I look at the situation, I agree with you. I don't think there's any way he doesn't play this week, because you look at Tacario coming back for his senior season, where his draft stock was ahead of his junior year. This is the kind of game where it's, oh yeah, Tacario Davis was a, top 5 cornerback prospect going into the 2024 season. Obviously some things happen at Arizona. You look at this game against Jeremiah Smith, if he balls out, he shows what he is capable of and what John Richardson, Washington's secondary coach, believes he is capable of. All of a sudden, yeah, this is a guy who's certainly back in the discussion of top 3, top 5 corner in the country, which is where you and I both believe that he should be. And on top of that, we saw what Ryan Walters' defense looked like without him. It wasn't as aggressive. There was a lot more sitting back and just, keeping everything in front. Whereas with somebody like Tacario Davis involved, it's so much easier to play press man and to get up in the faces of even the best receivers in the country, in Jeremiah Smith, in Carnell Tate, and what those guys bring to the field. And watch out for tight end Max Klare, by the way. He's another really talented prospect who I can't wait to kind of break down later in the week, because there are some really interesting matchups there. But right now, because of Tacario, everything kind of hinges on this, where, again, like you said, we both believe that he is going to play in this game. And so much of what Washington's defense can do plays off of him. When we talk about the run defense a little bit later on, that all starts with, okay, if you can't get Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sayin in rhythm because Tacario is disrupting things from a timing standpoint, great. All of a sudden that makes it easier to attack downhill and do some other different things. But again, it all does start with making sure that he's able to play in this game.
Yeah, I mean, even if it comes out of limited practice participation throughout, call it Monday through Thursday, even you get to the walkthrough on Friday, I don't think it matters, because like, Tacario is smart enough, he's been around long enough, he knows this defense. Obviously, being with John Richardson for a while, like, there's kind of an understanding of, hey, we don't really need to have him go all out at practice this week. We need him to play on Saturday. That's where you're not going to have it be where he's just not practicing. But I think that's also, if you think about it, probably where the questionable comes into play, where a lot of times that's how much are they participating in practice. When you look at the NFL, guys are probable, questionable, doubtful, those type of things. It's usually limited in practice the day before that, or, full participant in practice if they're going to be, probable or going to play. I think when you get to Wednesday, Thursday, that's where I would say, again, if you ask Jedd again, he might say questionable just because he's Jedd Fisch. But I think at that point, it would be a lot more telling if, he's not practicing. It's like, okay, well, to me, I just don't see any path truly to where Tacario doesn't play.
So, and a lot of that does come down to the opponent. This is the 5th time the number 1 team in the AP poll is coming into Husky Stadium. Fun fact, the other 4 times it's been either USC or Ohio State. But when you look at what this matchup just provides, we've seen Ohio State, I was going to get ahead of myself and say we saw what they were doing last year in terms of standpoint of running the ball with that just incredible duo of Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. But having this elite passing offense with a guy like Julian Sayin at the helm, who we know what his high-end potential is, former 5-star number 1 overall recruit kind of deal, Jeremiah Smith being the best player in the country as well, there's going to be a lot of passing in this game, and it's why I feel somewhat comfortable with what Washington is doing on the back end of the defense so far. Again, with Tacario Davis involved, because we look at what Leroy Bryant did last week. I don't think, and this is no disrespect to him, either way, I don't think you want to trust him against a Jeremiah Smith. You'd probably move Ephesians Prasak over there in the case that Tacario Davis doesn't play, and you put, whether it be Leroy or Dylan Robinson or Rashawn Clark, who Jedd Fisch said will get some snaps at outside corner during practice this week. One of those guys would start on the outside on Carnell Tate, and then you just kind of figure out some matchups from there. But either way, that's not putting your best team on the field. That's not your best matchup. That is the first round talent that you have on the outside at corner. So I think that the coaching staff is going to do everything that they can to make sure he plays. It sounds like he has been practicing. He did go through a warm-up before the Washington State game as well. And I feel like, a lot of our everydayers said this in the comments as well, that it didn't feel like he was going to play, nor should he play in that game. And obviously, when you look at the final score at the end of that, it wasn't a big deal. You didn't wind up needing him in that game. But somebody who you certainly would like to have, and it's unfortunate that you don't for at least the next month, is Buddah Al-Uqdah.
Ironically, though, when you talk about transfers and Arizona transfers, this is kind of the fortunate part about having 3 guys. We're absolutely losing Buddah is a significant loss because of what he had done through the first 3 games of the season. I think only had 1 missed tackle and was, I think, co-leader in tackles on the team, or one of the top 3 guys.
Third in tackles of 15 behind 2 guys with 16.
And so I think McKell is one of those guys as well. And you just look at it, he was always around the ball, always making an impact. And we saw that throughout fall camp, where he was a guy that was able to both make an impact against the run when, Jonah and Adam Muhammad are making their cuts, and also able to drop back in coverage. And so, yeah, Devin Bryant's been able to do a job for you, but I think finding that second pair to replace and kind of fill in for Tariq, that's going to be key for me. And is Jacob Manu up to speed enough? Is Ekry Alexander the guy you slide over there? I mean, you have options, so it's good that they went out in the transfer portal and didn't just rely on Buddah. But that being said, that is a significant loss for me.
So let's dive into this real quick. And also, the 2 co-leaders with 16 tackles are Devin Bryant and Alex McLaughlin at this point in time. McElestine is one of the guys that has 15 right now. But I mentioned Alex McLaughlin because I feel like we might see him playing a little bit more of that box safety linebacker role this week because of a guy like Max Klare, who is just such a talented pass catcher at tight end. And then you look at, it'll probably be Ekry Alexander that slides into the starting role with or without Jacob Manu. Jedd Fisch said today that he's getting closer to return, could get cleared, and could play this week. We'll see just kind of how that works out. He said that Zadrius Randy-Saleh is not too far behind him as well. But we kind of just look at this position right now. And my biggest question without Buddah Al-Uqdah is more so the pass coverage and the run defense. Because I look at a guy like Ekry at 240, 245 pounds, whatever he's listed at right now. He is a really good downhill threat to defend the run. And I mean, this is no disrespect to him or Devin Bryant. Though that is their strength. Buddah was the best coverage linebacker that you had on this team. And, I think Jonathan Epperson can get there. I think Zadrius Randy-Saleh and Donovan Robinson are talented enough athletes to get there. But they're true freshmen right now. So I look at the way this room shapes up, and I think that there are still a lot of things that this group can do very, very well. But there are still some significant questions that I have that I wish they weren't going to have to answer against Ohio State. And that's something that I'm going to keep a close eye on going into this game, because I think one of the most important matchups outside of Jeremiah Smith versus Tacario Davis is what this front seven can do against Ohio State's rushing attack. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Square, because this episode is brought to you by Square, and your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And when you look at supporting a community, spending money at local businesses is one of the most important things, because it doesn't just support the business, it supports the people behind it and the community around it. Those local spots are what make the neighborhood feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockdowncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets, the best prices, with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time for this weekend's matchup between Washington and Ohio State, because that matchup is sold out. And if you're looking for the best deals, you're going to find them on Game Time. And great news, the app makes it super simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Lars, as we look at this matchup between Ohio State's rushing attack, which, like I noted a little bit earlier, is still certainly solid, but just not what it was last year. And I feel like that's just a completely fair assumption, because you lose so many guys to the NFL like that program does every year. It's hard to replicate that in an elite level. Right now, Washington has the number 4 rushing defense in the Big Ten, allowing 62.67 yards per game, and they're going to be facing the number 8 rushing offense in Ohio State, which is rushing for 192 yards a game. But one thing that I think is really important to note in this, where, like Washington, Ohio State has played a couple of, lesser non-conference opponents, but they've also had a matchup against Texas. Texas, real shocker here, top 10 team down in the SEC, has a better front seven than Washington. In that game, Texas was able to hold Ohio State to 77 yards on 34 carries, which is an average of 2.3 yards per carry. I think that this is something, when you look at this game, I'm so curious to see what Washington could do, because the way you built this front seven through the transfer portal, through high school recruiting, there are so many bodies that you think can do a job and play 10, 15, 20 snaps. Logan Sagapolu, Simone Peppa being important, just names to throw out there at nose tackle, especially to stop the run. Is it going to be enough? We'll see. But I think that Washington certainly has the bodies to keep things competitive in the trenches.
They have the depth. The question is, do they have the overarching talent? I mean, you also think about this, does Ohio State have its traditional offensive line, like the offensive line that we think of, like you mentioned last season? The answer is, I think, no and no. And I think that's why this game is so intriguing, because you don't look and say one team clearly has an advantage over the other. Ohio State obviously has some very talented backs. Washington has some very talented defensive linemen. I think of Tacario Davis. Like, that's a guy that, to me, could be the X factor here. What happens about Jacob Lane? There's a number of guys you can kind of throw out between the interior and out on the edge. To me, it's going to be who wins, and this is no shocker here, who wins their one-on-one matchups. And Ryan Walters, we talk about his defense. It's about setting up those one-on-ones with Simone Peppa and the big guys, to clog 2 lanes and, create that one-on-one opening. But you have to take advantage of that. And to me, we've seen that at times, but even against Wazoo, there was a couple of opportunities for them to, give up some yards. And obviously, like I made that prediction, they ended up being, I think it was about 25. You said, I said it.
27.
27. I said they get to 56, I want to say. But either way, you look at it and say Washington State is nowhere near the talent that Ohio State has. So it's going to be a question of how quickly can you level up in that, because Colorado State gave you probably your best test in the run department, and that was only for 1 quarter. So are they tested enough? Well, we're certainly going to find out on Saturday, but no doubt they have the bodies to do it.
So this is something that I'm really intrigued by, because when you look at the stable of running backs that Ohio State is going to throw at you, they've been going with CJ Donaldson as the lead guy this year, the West Virginia transfer, who I think has been solid this year. But everything I've seen from Buckeye fans, from our buddy Jay Stevens over on Locked On Buckeyes, everyone just kind of surrounding the program, they're all clamoring for Bo Jackson, elite name, to get some more carries. And this is a dude who's been really impressive so far this year. 18 carries, 217 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, it came into, kind of cupcake non-conference games, but that's what all teams are playing this year. And just like with Washington, the numbers are the numbers. All you can do is look at who these teams have played. And he didn't play against Texas. So that's just, it is what it is. And I think that that's something I'm going to be really curious to watch as this week goes on, because if he's a guy that they want to get the ball into his hands more often, which why would you not? He's a super explosive back. But I look at this matchup and I can't help but think that Washington does have what it takes to hang with Ohio State in terms of the scheme. Ryan Walters understanding what it takes to compete with Ryan Day, because he's done it before. There are several different things that I think Washington can do to keep themselves in this game on the defensive side of the ball. It's just going to come down to, can you get these guys on the ground? And I think without Buddah Al-Uqdah, there's certainly going to be questions. But I look at playing a guy like Alex McLaughlin closer to the line of scrimmage. I was really hoping we would get an update from CJ Christian, or about safety CJ Christian, during Jedd Fisch's Monday press conference. It looks like we'll be able to learn a little bit more about him later in the week. But I look at this defense that Washington's thrown out there, and there have certainly been questions. I feel like that's extremely obvious. But I also feel like there are a lot of things to come into this week with and say, all right, I feel comfortable with this. I feel comfortable with that, especially in the run game.
Man, wouldn't it be great if you could guarantee you had Javon Parker in this? I think that there's certain guys where if you had them, if Washington was at their full strength, I'm thinking this is even a little closer matchup than even we're probably going to predict. But you just look at, even with the guys that they do have, it's just a matter of which chess pieces can you get to work at the right time, because what this game really is probably going to come down to is 5 or 7 plays, and 3 or 4 are probably going to be on the ground. And to me, it's a question of, do you have those missed tackles? Do you have the chance to get a guy down on 3rd and 4, for a 3-yard game, but he ends up breaking a tackle and you get, it's going to be those drive extending plays that either cost Washington or Washington's able to show up for. And I think, you look and think what we saw. We kind of primarily have to go against Wazoo here, just because that's like you mentioned, the best team UW has faced on their schedule today. You can't really say Colorado State or UC Davis or any better than that. Maybe Colorado State. But you think about the fact that in both of those games, there were times that UW had the chance to lose control or lose, their edge in the game, and they didn't. Playing back at Husky Stadium, if this game was in Columbus, probably 2-3 touchdown favorite, for Ohio State, you probably win by at least 2 touchdowns. But given this game is at Husky Stadium, you have to think like the defensive line is going to feed off of that. Ryan Walters is going to build off of that, knowing how hard, it's going to be to hear things, and you're going to probably lean on the ground game if you're Ohio State. So play into that if you're Washington. Like this is the time where Ontario Thompson, Ty, all those guys that made the trek to Washington say, hey, we want to team up with Jedd Fisch and Ryan Walters. Make it count this weekend, because you're not going to get a better matchup.
So I want to go back to one thing you mentioned there about the energy of the game in the stadium. We've seen it on Twitter, all over social media, with guys like Josh Remington of the athletic department, our buddy Tony Castricone, who does play-by-play and everything, just hyping up what the environment, what the matchup is going to be like just inside Husky Stadium this weekend. And I couldn't be more excited for all of that. And I think that's something that I think you really have to consider here, where Jeremiah Smith, I know at Big Ten Media Day, he called Autzen Stadium the loudest stadium that he's ever played in. I feel like, and this is just going to be a very different environment to that, even though that was a top 5 matchup at the time. Husky Stadium is just different. Husky Stadium is better, louder, whatever you want to say, compared to Autzen Stadium. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if we see anything in the comments down below saying otherwise, it's definitely an Oregon fan. But outside of that, this is also the first road start of Julian Sayan's career. So you might want to try to run the ball early and establish yourself as a physical team with Ohio State, again, being the number 1 team in the nation. If that's their plan of attack, that's not going to shock me at all. So finding ways to get a young quarterback comfortable by just saying, okay, look, we're able to establish our will on the ground. Now we can go out there and, maybe that opens some things up for them in the passing game. I feel like there are so many different ways that Husky Stadium as a whole can impact this game. And as you said, the defensive line is going to be the ones that can probably feed off of that the most. And I'm really excited to see what this is going to look like, because you mentioned Javon Parker most likely not being able to play in this game. This is the healthiest, like now that, we saw all these guys play against Washington State as well, the healthiest the defensive line has been this season has been in a long time, really, if we're being truly honest. If you want to just go back through not even last year, but the last couple of years of Kalen DeBoer's tenure and what the D-line looked like at different points in time, this defensive line is deeper. It's stronger than it has been in so long. And while it, people are going to look at it and say, because Ohio State has all these, rightfully so, extremely talented guys along their offensive line, it's going to be a really tough battle. I think if just all of these guys can do their jobs and play at this serviceable average to slightly above average level, the consistent rotation of bodies that you can throw out there at that position could be enough to just cause a little bit of disruption in the run game. And I think that Washington is going to be a little bit more in this game than, even when you look at some of the sports books right now. I think our good friends at FanDuel have changed the line to 8.5 right now in favor of Ohio State. Like, I think it could be even closer than that, because this is a good team and there's a lot to like. And I think this is a really well-coached team, and that's going to show up in this game. But Lars, speaking of well-coached, Demond Williams takes home his first Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week award. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda, because Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same intention to how we craft every model. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Nappa leather upholstery, and you can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. It's awesome to see Demond Williams take home that Offensive Player of the Week award, or co-Offensive Player of the Week, 16 for 19 in the passing game, 84% completion percentage, 298 yards, 4 touchdowns, adds 88 yards and another touchdown on the ground. And Lars, the first thing I want to say, to be completely honest, because there are two things I want to get to here. The first one, we got some tremendous suggestions from some everydayers leading into the season about what we can do to continue to improve the show. Really excited to continue trying to implement a couple of those. One of them that a couple people threw out there was our own Dog of the Week award. And just a peek behind the scenes here, the way you and I had kind of discussed this with a couple of our other friends as well, because we wanted to make sure that we got all our wonderful friends in the media involved in this, was we would all throw out an option and have the everydayers vote on it on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, wherever. Just create some of these polls and say, hey, you pick who we get to talk about because you were impressed with his performance. This is now 3 straight weeks where Washington has played a game and then gotten an Offensive Player of the Week. They're 3 for 3 in that department. Jonah Coleman gets the first 2, and now Demond Williams. And the second thing I wanted to mention here is one thing that Jedd Fisch said over the summer. I can't remember which show it was on or wherever it was. He said something that you and I talked a lot about on the show, saying, oh yeah, that Sun Bowl performance, that was the floor for Demond Williams. 374 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, plus 48 yards in a rushing score in that game. I feel like this game was better because he didn't have the turnover and you win. Like, it's exciting to think about. And I just look back at that and say, I don't know if he was right, because that's still an insanely high bar to set in terms of numbers, but Jedd was onto something, man.
I mean, he was, and Jedd would tell you it's because he's known Demond longer and better than anybody else has and all those type of things. But he's also kind of been the perfect coach for Demond, because he's put him in kind of what we talked about coming into the season. Jedd has put Demond in the perfect scenario, in the perfect situation, every single play call. Like, there hasn't been a play call that has been bad for Demond that I can think of off the top of my head. In reality, you look at the Wazoo game, the deep ball to Denzel on the first drive of the game where he overshot him in the end zone by about 2.5 yards. Came back and hit him on a 29-yarder like 3 or 4 plays later. So he recalibrated there and got right. that means he only had 2 other incomplete passes the entire game. Like, that should tell you something. Now, yes, how many of them were a high percentage throw where, you have the check down to Jonah Coleman and things like that? Sure. But DeMond was still making all the throws. He had the deep ball to Omari Evans at the end of the game, a number of other throws from the short, intermediate, and deep passing game where it's not just, hey, dink and dunk, kind of the Mike Leach offense, if you will, where, wow, he was, 35 of, 38 for, whatever. It's like, well, yeah, because he's playing 5 wides. It's a lot different scenario. And then you add to it, by the way, almost at a 100-yard rushing game. Like, that to me is where we talk. And again, I'm going to toot my own horn here, where you go back to January, it's like the total yards thing is real with DeMond. And now you talk about the matchup with Julian saying, I'm saying there's more than a chance that DeMond's the better quarterback in this game by the end of it. And I'm not sure. I'm not saying it's not close, but I think people are going to be surprised again. I
think because, we heard it said on the broadcast last week of, oh, this could be like the national coming out party for DeMond and everything. No, that would be this game, if anything. And one thing I want to add on to that is Washington's average pass play or yards per completion in this game against Washington State was 18.6 yards. That's just a unfathomable number. That's incredible to see. But I look at what DeMond has done, and each of these first 3 games, it's still very clearly a learning process because you hear Jedd Fisch talk about it. You hear DeMond talk about it and say, okay, yeah, I should have taken this sack. I held onto the ball too long there. I didn't need to take this hit. I could have slid or I could have got out of bounds doing this and that. And I think that's one of the most exciting things because there are a whole bunch of advanced stats. I have some people that sent them to me. I was going back and forth with a good friend of mine this morning on a couple of them where it's, the EPA per play, it's decision-making, it's all these other different things for a true sophomore that's 19 years old to be just have such a high football IQ and such a high awareness right now with all of these just, I don't want to say minor details, but all these things that I feel like can go overlooked in this day and age of people that, aren't watching every game that'll look at a box score and say, oh, well, he did this well. Oh, well, that's pretty crazy. When you turn on DeMond's tape and watch what he's doing, there is no reason that he shouldn't already be considered a top 5 to 10 quarterback in the country at this point in time. And I feel very comfortable saying that because every single week, again, there are things that he's still improving on. And at the same time, there are so many things where it's okay, like this is already elite. That's already top 3 in the Big Ten in this department. That's top 3 in the Big Ten in that department. And this is just as a passer. This is without even mentioning the fact that look at the touchdown that he scored on the ground this past week. Look at the way he's able to escape the pocket and use his athleticism and the way he's just able to escape sacks just magically on a just seemingly drive-to-drive basis when there are guys in the backfield. All of these other things that go along with it is why Jedd Fisch has, said for so long, oh, hey, I want to get him to New York for the Heisman ceremony one day. I think he can be a first-round pick. I think he can be that. We're starting to finally see that because he's got the opportunity to prove himself as the full-time quarterback.
And I think it all revolves around building up to it, where last season DeMond had every chance to kind of learn the offense, both from Will and in each scenario, where this season we haven't seen him in every scenario, but from start to finish in every game, you haven't really seen DeMond make the same mistake twice. You're going to hate this, but hasn't really made a mistake. I'll put it that way. A true mistake. He is, DeMond has
Don't jinx anything.
I'm just saying, when you talk about because when you talk about him going for runs and things like that, he's not making the unnecessary. Let me gain the extra 2 or 3 yards here when I could have 2nd and 3 instead of 2nd and 1. Who cares at that point? You're still making the right decisions and the right reads. So for me, it's a case of now this is going to be his toughest test, and this will without question be DeMond's the best defense DeMond has faced in his time in college, and certainly this season when you look at Caleb Downs, and I'll just say in company again, where you really start there. And I think for me, if DeMond is able to beat Caleb Downs, bait him on some eyes, get him off his feet, those type of things, but also use his feet to get maybe to that 2nd, 3rd level of Ohio State's defense, that is where this game is going to change. If DeMond is, running for his life like he was against Oregon last season, not really sure I'm going to be too confident in UW pulling out a victory there.
No, but this is one of the things that we talked about in our post-game show, where a lot of what we've seen DeMond doing, the way he's been able to take these steps, is because the offensive line is better. And I think that's a really important thing to note here. But 2 things that I want to talk about. The first one is with Matt Patricia now as Ohio State's defensive coordinator. this is a very important thing to note where Jedd Fisch talked about his relationship with Matt Patricia from obviously both of them working under Bill Belichick for a long time. And I think that's something where I asked him, because I feel like Jedd's offense is uniquely suited to try to, I don't want to say exploit a Matt Patricia defense, but counter it and combat it. And it's not just because of what Jedd brings to the table from his just unique knowledge of that style of defense, of that tree, but it also comes from the fact that Washington was practicing against a very similar defense, and DeMond in particular was practicing against a very similar defense all of last season when Steve Belichick was Washington's defensive coordinator. You don't think that two of Bill Belichick's defensive coordinators have, run a lot of the same concepts and a lot of the same different things? It's not easy. I remember when Will Rogers told us last fall that this was the hardest defense he's ever had to play or practice against at any point in time. Like, that's all very real. It's the disguises. It's all the other things that we don't necessarily have time to go into. But on top of that, one thing that I'm really, really intrigued to see, you mentioned Caleb Downs. There are so many other guys that we're going to really dive in on over the course of the week, because the biggest difference, and I think what A, makes DeMond so elite, but also B, makes this one of, if not the best defense in the country right now, is the elite level of athletes that they have at all three levels of the field. And it could make them very uniquely suited to try to spy DeMond or try to do a couple of different things. But this is where I'm really excited about it, because not only have they faced Arch Manning, who I wouldn't put anywhere near the same caliber of dual threat quarterback as DeMond Williams, but they've also faced Parker Navarro at Ohio, who is also a very solid running quarterback in his own right, but also not the same caliber of athlete as DeMond Williams. So I think that there's going to be a lot of really exciting, just different matchups that we're going to see in terms of quarterback spies and different things like that. But what this game is really going to come down to, in my opinion, when it comes to Washington's offense versus Ohio State's defense, is DeMond making out of structure plays. And we're going to see it happen at some point in time for one reason or another. He's going to get thrown off script and he's going to have to scramble and get out of the pocket. And the question is, can you out athlete Ohio State? Usually the answer is no. But I think DeMond is the perfect guy, combined with everything else that he has around him, to try to do that at the very least.
And to kind of nail home that point, this is also the most gettable Ohio State's been in a while. Like last season, this game's not gettable. So in Columbus or in Seattle. This season, with Julian saying, you look at the running backs, like they're good but not great. The offensive line is decent, good but not great. Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith are freaks. Julian Sainz is a very good quarterback. Beyond that, Ryan Day can have an off day, and I think we've seen that throughout his career after taking it over for Urban Meyer in Ohio State. So to me, like, this is a chance for Jedd to say, you know what? I can be one of the best coaches in college football, and by the way, I got some pretty darn good players to back it up.
It'd be really impressive doing that off a bye, because Ryan Day is almost undefeated. I think it's 20-1 or somewhere in that department. Coming off a bye, I had the note and I totally lost it. But that's another thing that is certainly going to make this a very, very interesting matchup. But Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thanks to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click the little bell, so as we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.